welcome back to Tales of Fantasia. Today I am reviewing for you Jayne, an Australian indie author's debut novel, Squid Ward. Now, Squid Ward is a horror that is very short. It's a novella-length horror, about 145 pages, and it explores themes of infertility and pregnancy loss using a at times humorous horror lens to convey just how far women are willing to go to have a baby. I think this is one of the most clever premises for a horror that I've read in a really long time. The thought of a woman being so desperate for a child that she will go to any lengths and enter into an experimental treatment that she knows nothing about is just so chilling and so close to the reality that I feel exists in this world and that I experience myself as a midwife, coming into contact with women who've gone to great lengths to have a pregnancy and to carry a baby to full term. And I think that is such a clever way to write what you know and turn your experience of grief and trauma into a novel. I feel like Chloe has really nailed the suspense and the horror element of Squid Ward so beautifully, while still keeping it a little bit lighthearted with the sort of fish-based, ocean-based puns that she has interwoven in the story. There are some absolutely killer lines in this book which really have you kind of, chuckling to yourself. And yet at the same time, it's exploring these really deep and important themes and still contains that horror element to it. And I think that that's been done so well by Chloe for her debut. The suspense and the pacing of this book is excellent. You're hooked really quickly when you get to know the main character Dory and her partner Taylor, and when you get this really deep sense of yearning and longing for a baby from Dory very early on in the book. And then as the book unfolds, you realise just how far Dory was willing to go to have a baby, and the horror is at first really subtle and then it hits you like a punch in the face at the end. Like the final scene of this book was absolutely chilling and heart-wrenching. And I feel like if this is Jayne's debut, I'm really excited to see where she goes as a writer from here on in. There were a few stylistic choices in this book that I wasn't a big fan of, some changing of tense and some sentence structure choices that I found a little bit jarring and wasn't a huge fan of. But I think that this is such a strong book and such a strong and clever premise to a story. And so I kept on reading and actually found that as the story went on, I got more and more absorbed into what was happening for Dory. And I really, by the end, I was really actually quite gripped by it and really enjoying myself. So if you're looking for an easy entry-level horror to get into, I would highly recommend Squid Ward. I'm always a fan of supporting indie authors, especially Australian indie authors, and I absolutely love that Jayne also donated to Bears of Hope from her pre-orders of this book, which is an Australian pregnancy and infant loss charity. It's a charity that is quite close to my heart as a midwife because it's a charity whose resources I access quite frequently in my job and provide to women in my job. And so seeing that an author has taken this story of grief and trauma and infertility and turned it into a horror that explores that very human experience in a really interesting way, in a really different way that I'd not heard of before, and then has donated to a cause like that, I am a really big fan of authors who give back to the community. So that is another thing that I really loved about this book. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I will always admire authors who can write a well-constructed plot with complex characters and relationships and exploring complex themes in a novella length, and Jayne has done that beautifully in her debut, and I really, really loved the relationship that Dory, the main character, has with her dog Moby as a childless woman in my 30s who's currently recording with my dog on my lap. That was something that I really loved exploring. The final scene, or the final kind of sequence of events in this story, where Taylor, Dory's partner, comes to the slow realization of what she's done and the lengths that she's gone to actually become pregnant, were really chilling to me. Like I really loved the scene from the dinner scene with her sister-in-law and her brother on. That is where the story really gripped me and really came into its own for me. I think that exploration of, you know, that tunnel vision that women can get about that yearning for pregnancy, and the way that Dory kind of lost touch with reality throughout this book, and the lengths that Dory was willing to go to, and the way that everyone around her could see that there was something wrong except for her. I really loved that kind of element of the horror, where you're seeing everything. It's written first person, and so we're seeing everything through Dory's eyes, but at the same time we're getting this glimpse of other people's perceptions of what was going on for her at the same time. And I really loved that element of the book. I really thought that was a really interesting, you know, little way of building that horror and suspense. I'm not a massive horror reader, but I picked up this book because my friend Tiff, Devour of Words, who I've talked about before because she's recommended so many books to me, she is a part of the street team for Chloe, and she had read the book and reviewed it, and I'd seen her review and kind of had some conversations with her about the themes of the book, and thought, you know, I'm a midwife, it's a book about pregnancy, loss, and, you know, infertility, and I thought, hey, this is probably something that I'd enjoy. And so I picked it up, and I'm so glad that I did, because I did really enjoy this book. But it's also a plot that is so unique, so different to any other horror book that I've ever heard of, that I think that anyone would pick this up and enjoy it for what it is. Squidward is a really easy, quick horror read. So if you're not a massive horror fan, if you're not someone who reads the genre regularly, I think it's a really accessible jumping off point into horror. And how great to be able to support an Australian indie author in that exploration of the genre. But if you are a big horror reader, I think it's something that is such a different take on horror and such a different premise to the story. I don't think it's like anything you would have ever read before. So I think this is a really great read for any horror lovers or anyone wanting to get into horror, especially if you have, you know, had any fertility struggles or been on that journey of pregnancy loss in the past. I feel like this is a book that you would really connect to and really enjoy. And I think Chloe has conveyed the emotion in this book really, really well. You've got that yearning, you've got the desperation, and you've got that horror and suspense all building throughout this story in such an incredible way. So I'm really looking forward to reading more of Chloe's work in the future and seeing how her voice as an author grows. As I said, there were some stylistic choices in the book that I wasn't a massive fan of. Some little sentence structure things that I found a little bit jarring, and some switching of tense that I found a bit confusing at the start, but I think that that was a very deliberate stylistic choice by Chloe. And I do think that it actually, once I got absorbed into the story, I read a lot of purple prose. I read a lot of fluffy kind of language books. So this was just a very different style of writing to what I normally read. And I think that this is, once I got past that kind of jarring, you know, difference between flicking between, I've been reading Young Mungo and then reading this. Once I got past that difference in the prose, I actually really, really enjoyed the book. So yeah, big recommendation here from me. I think it's a good solid debut novel, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Chloe does in the future.